Hey there, welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case, and tonight the DNC moves to officially nominate Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, Russia agrees to a major prisoner swap with the U.S., and the Pentagon reaches a deal with the men who planned 9/11. All right, well, as I said yesterday, Renata is away on vacation. She's going to be away for the next couple weeks, actually, and filling in for her is FISM's Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Sam. Happy to be doing this alongside you. And I have to say real quick, we've been doing this for a few years now. That list of headlines is still insane. Like, you hear headlines like that and you're like, what?
Well, that's why we got to get to them, right?
Exactly, we got to get into them.
Yeah, well, we'll kick off with Kamala Harris, where the DNC is kicking off its virtual roll call today to formally nominate Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic presidential nominee. Harris was the only candidate with enough delegate support to qualify and already has more than enough support for the nomination itself. The process began this morning and will end on Monday. Democratic National Committee Chair Jamie Harrison, alongside Democratic National Convention Chair Minion Moore, released a joint statement saying, quote, Democratic delegates from across the nation made their voices heard, overwhelmingly backing Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party's presumptive nominee. The virtual roll call comes weeks before the Democratic National Convention officially begins in Chicago on August 19th. The early nominating process was originally intended to make sure the Democratic nominee could get on the ballot in Ohio before the state's final deadline, although Governor Mike DeWine has ultimately decided to extend that date.
And as Harris does accept her position in the presidential race, former President Donald Trump will not hold anything back against his new opponent. Case in point, Trump recently appeared before the National Association of Black Journalists in Chicago this Wednesday, where he had a lot of criticisms to levy against Harris. His most biting comment, however, dealt with how Kamala treats the issue of race. Take a look.
Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I can say no, I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is always identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that she is...
I think somebody should look into that.
Trump did also have the opportunity to try and present himself as a preferred candidate for the voting demographic. In fact, Trump fashioned himself to be the best president for the black population, quote, since Abraham Lincoln.
I love the black population of this country. I've done so much for the black population of this country, including employment, including opportunity zones with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. I have been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
The Harris campaign issued its own statement following Trump's appearance on stage, saying the former president, quote, failed black families and left the entire country digging out of the ditch he left us in.
And you know, Ian, I'm seeing that comment about Kamala Harris is certainly raising some controversy. And speaking of controversy surrounding the former president, AG Merrick Garland is now speaking out against Judge Eileen Cannon's decision to toss out Trump's classified documents case on the grounds that special counsel Jack Smith was improperly appointed. Appearing on NBC News this week, Garland said he disagrees with her decision, arguing he simply followed the process used by past administrations.
For more than 20 years, I was a federal judge. Do I look like somebody who would make that basic mistake about the law? I don't think so. Our position is that it's constitutional and valid. That's why we appealed. I will say that this is the same process of appointing special counsel as was followed in the previous administration and the special counsel Durham and special counsel Mueller in multiple special counsels over the decades going back to Watergate and the special prosecutor in that case. Till now, every single court, including the Supreme Court, that has considered the legality of a special counsel appointment has upheld it.
Judge Cannon wrote that Smith's appointment violated the Appointments Clause of the U.S. Constitution because it wasn't approved by Congress. Smith has since appealed that ruling.
And while we're on Trump's cases here, earlier this week, the House of Representatives actually filed an intervention in the contempt of Congress case against former White House advisor Steve Bannon. A brief filed by the House General Counsel argues that the select committees, which had subpoenaed Bannon, were not properly established by then-Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and that the committee leadership did not properly follow legislature rules. The brief comes after House Speaker Mike Johnson promised in June to intervene in that case against Bannon. The former White House advisor under Trump was convicted of contempt of Congress after refusing to answer 2 subpoenas from the controversial January 6th Democrat-led committee. House Speaker Mike Johnson said of the January 6th committee earlier this year that it was, quote, "We think wrongfully constituted, we think the work was tainted, we think that they may have very well covered up evidence and maybe even more nefarious activities." Bannon previously cited executive privilege in his decision not to comply, and he's currently serving a 4-month prison sentence.
Elsewhere, the White House says it's now working on more plans to cancel student debt. Although the Department of Education did not outline the plans in detail, it did say that borrowers could soon expect an email notifying them of new options. According to the department, the new plan will raise the amount of borrowers eligible for debt relief to over 30 million people and will target borrowers with higher interest. In a statement announcing the plan, Biden took credit for canceling the student debt of over 5 million Americans over the last 3 years. According to estimates, the amount of money potentially forgiven under the new plan could exceed $7 billion. GOP lawmakers have since vowed to oppose President Biden's new plan.
I give him credit for continuing to try, but you think after how many times, 3 times, 4 times is this, he might finally get the message, but maybe not.
And after the Supreme Court has said that he can't do some of these things, and yet he's still trying to do it.
Exactly, he's still trying to go for it. So we'll keep an eye on that, obviously, to see if it does end up going anywhere. But finally, let's take a look at the economy here, where Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is signaling that there may be some interest rate cuts on the horizon once again. Speaking after a Federal Open Market Committee meeting on Wednesday, Powell told reporters that interest rates might go down on certain conditions.
The broad sense of the committee is that the economy is moving closer to the point at which it will be appropriate to reduce our policy rate. In that, we will be data dependent, but not data point dependent. So it will not be a question of responding specifically to 1 or 2 data releases. The question will be whether the totality of the data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks are consistent with rising confidence on inflation and maintaining a solid labor market. If that test is met, a reduction in our policy rate could be on the table as soon as the next meeting in September.
Now, the Federal Reserve held their rates at the current range of around 5.5%, which has unfortunately been the ongoing rate for about a year now. So unsurprisingly, people have mixed feelings on the news, seeing as how the past few meetings ended with similar results. And up next, Russia agrees to a major prisoner swap with the U.S. We'll be right back with more information after this.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay, or to go, to remain the same, or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
Do you know what you are supporting when you purchase mutual funds and stocks? Think about it. When you invest in a company, you make a decision to support the things that that company supports. And it may not be things that you agree with. Financial Issues is a ministry teaching people like you how to invest biblically responsibly, keeping your investments clear of companies that may support an ungodly agenda. Learn more by going to financialissues.org. Financialissues.org.
But I felt very comfortable in that decision because I found a lot of support. Like everyone here, like always made sure like keep in contact with me. This is what ultimately changed my decision. You know, knowing that I had all this support that I didn't know I had. Now that he's here, he's 4 months old. Like I look at him and I honestly like it just makes me want to cry. Like
Hey there, welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We kick off this segment here with major news coming out of Russia, where the U.S. has now agreed to a prisoner swap, freeing Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan. It comes only a month after Gershkovich was sentenced to 16 years in prison after being arrested in 2023 on espionage charges. Whelan, meanwhile, was arrested on similar charges back in 2018 and was given a 16-year sentence as well in 2020. The U.S. has condemned both cases. They're being freed alongside two other journalists, one of them an American citizen and the other a green card holder. President Biden celebrated their release.
Their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families. This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's a relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time.
The deal involves 24 prisoners and is being described by the Wall Street Journal as part of the largest and most complex East-West prisoner swap since the Cold War.
The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. And I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country.
Certainly those calling for both Whelan's and Gershkovich's release must be very happy today. But while we are on the topic of Russia, why don't we go to the Ukrainian war for a second here, where forces in Ukraine completely destroyed a massive drone bombardment, which was launched by Russia on Tuesday night. Nearly 90 suicide drones were used in that attack, making it one of the largest ones this year. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the successful defense an important result, and he says sufficient supplies make it possible to protect Ukraine's sky. One Kyiv-based expert says that troops are using jamming devices to make the GPS malfunction on the drones, and this forces them to higher altitudes, where Soviet-era planes then take them out. And that tactic will likely be refined with U.S. F-16 jets, the first of which were delivered yesterday. The U.S. and NATO allies withheld the number of warplanes transferred, but Bloomberg reports that it was 24 jets at most.
Elsewhere, it looks like the U.S. was not involved in the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. That's according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. His death has raised concerns that ceasefire talks will collapse between both Hamas and Israel, as Blinken says it still remains a crucial goal for the U.S. to see a ceasefire deal and the release of hostages held in Gaza.
First, this is something we were not aware of or involved in. It's very hard to speculate, and I've learned over many years never to speculate on the impact one event may have on something else. So I can't tell you what this means. I can tell you that the imperative of getting a ceasefire, the importance that that has for everyone remains.
The White House said yesterday that Haniyeh's death does not help the political temperature go down, with spokesman John Kirby saying the administration is concerned about continued escalation in the Middle East.
And it isn't just Kirby who's concerned about escalation there. Many are concerned about escalation in the Middle East, especially as Israel makes strikes against both Hamas and Hezbollah, its enemy to the north. Previously, that concern had extended to local airlines in Lebanon, which had suspended some flights following an Israeli strike in the region. But now it seems that Israel itself is the latest victim of flight cancellations. Delta and United Airlines recently suspended services into Tel Aviv, citing security concerns. United said that its suspension will last until further notice, while Delta plans to continue flights into and out of the city after Friday, August 2nd, although both airlines did state that they are constantly monitoring the situation in the area to make any necessary and appropriate decisions. And obviously these new cancellations come as Iran has made a more direct threat against Israel, as it says Israel assassinated Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran recently.
And the tensions aren't just in the Middle East. We're also going to look at them in Europe, where the UK is in an absolute uproar after a stabbing spree left 3 children dead and 10 others injured. The suspect has now been identified as 17-year-old Axel Rudakabana, a UK native born to Rwandan immigrants. Authorities had previously suppressed the attacker's identity due to the country's strict privacy laws of juvenile criminals, but ultimately released his name as he's going to turn 18 in just a few days now. The attack prompted protests across the entire country, many of them speaking out against high crime associated with mass immigration from Africa and the Middle East. At least 100 protesters have been arrested. And coming up next, the Pentagon reaches a plea deal with the men who planned the 9/11 terrorist attacks back in 2001. We'll get the details on that deal and more after a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In January of 1959, a group of 10 young Russian college students set out on a hike through the Ural Mountains in Siberia on a journey of several hundred miles in total. One student, who was suffering various health problems at the time, was actually forced to turn back not that long into the hike. It proved to be the very thing that saved his life because, in the wilds of the Ural Mountains, a mysteriously unexplained tragedy occurred in which all 9 remaining hikers were killed, and according to their death wounds, killed in potentially brutal and possibly purposeful fashion. The cause of death remains a mystery to this day, as historians have wondered now for more than 60 years what happened at Dyatlov Pass. Well, in the winter of 1959, these 10 students, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, for whom the pass has since been named to memorialize himself and the other victims, were all experienced mountaineers. They took a journey that was supposed to span several hundred miles across the threshold between Europe and Asia, known, as we said earlier, as the Ural Mountains, a rather treacherous region to be sure, but one that has been traversed thousands of times throughout history and was not impossible by any means. This time, the only incident in the trip's beginning stages was the early departure of one of the 10 students, a young man named Yuri Yudin, who experienced severe health problems that likely would have put him in severe danger had he continued. As it turned out, in all likelihood, he would have ended up in fatal danger had he continued, based on what was discovered several months later after the remaining 9 team members failed to return home on time. The 9 hikers, 7 men and 2 women, including a Russian veteran of the Second World War, were killed by what is to this day an unknown catastrophe. Now, their remains were found in various clusters, none of them alone, some near their tent, which had the appearance of being ripped to shreds from the inside, meanwhile others in a nearby wooded area, and the others some 20 feet under snow in the bed of a nearby frozen creek. What was especially disturbing was that every member of the expedition had what appeared to be violent injuries on their persons. For example, cracked skulls, internal bleeding, severe bruising. This has led many to wonder if this tragedy, which by the way was ruled a death by avalanche according to the Soviet government, was actually the result of something far more sinister. Now, in the last 60 years and counting, 2 separate investigations have been conducted, one in the years immediately following the incident, and then actually a follow-up investigation in the second decade of the 21st century. This was spurred on by the loved ones of the victims who were not satisfied with the Soviet government's initial findings. Now, some have wondered if this was the result of military testing done by the Russians, perhaps a bomb test, which was popular at this time, of course, in an area they thought was remote, but had gone horribly wrong because people were there. But there are others who, upon connecting this incident to some archaic, pre-Christian tales of horror myths involving vengeful demon gods who were worshipped by the native pagan tribes in the region, these have speculated that an incident such as this, with the specificity and brutality of the injuries, could only have come about by some horrific supernatural event. Now, I personally don't buy the Russian government's explanation. What I can say is that what happened here remains, to this day, one of the most unsettling mysteries of the 20th century. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Hi, I'm Aisha. At first, I was debating whether or not I was really pregnant and took a test. While I was waiting, they talked to me about different pregnancy choices and different options and information that helped me be more educated. To confirm, I got an ultrasound of the pregnancy test, and it was for sure positive, and I got to hear and see my baby for the first time. Hearing the heartbeat made me cry, and it was certain that I was going to keep my baby forever.
Do you want to invest in biblically responsible stocks? Financial Issues can help. For only $132 per year, our team of experts will help you make wise decisions with your money and guide you to successful investments that will not dishonor God. You'll also have access to our Portfolio Tracker tool, which will help you keep an eye on your asset allocations, and our Buys and Sells page, which will give you valuable information about biblically responsible stocks. Being a Financial Issues partner is the best way to invest in accordance with biblical values. Make the most of your money by becoming a partner today. Sign up at financialissues.org. That's financialissues.org.
But I felt very comfortable in that decision because I found a lot of support. Like everyone here, like always made sure like keep in contact with me. This is what ultimately changed my decision. You know, knowing that I had all this support that I didn't know I had. Now that he's here, he's 4 months old. Like I look at him and I honestly like it just makes me want to cry. Like.
And welcome back once again to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's continue with some big news coming out of the Pentagon, where it recently announced that it came to agree on a plea deal with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who is the man accused of masterminding the attack on September 11th, 2001. Two of Mohammed's accomplices are also reported to be included in this plea deal. And although details on the deal itself are scant, one U.S. official said that it almost certainly involved guilty pleas in exchange for the removal of the death penalty. This official also said that a plea for a life sentence was possible under the terms of the current agreement. Now, the three men accused have been serving their time at the Guantanamo Bay facility. Mohammed has long been accused of coming up with the plan to specifically fly the hijacked planes into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, however, became one of many voices who condemned the plea deal shortly after it was announced. McConnell said that it shows the Biden administration's, quote, cowardice in the face of terror.
Meanwhile, we're now learning that tens of thousands of people have been flown into the U.S. from Latin America under a 2023 initiative from the Biden administration. It's called the Safe Mobility Office Initiative. It started in May of 2023 and gave refugee status to 21,000 migrants from 7 nations during its first year alone. The Center for Immigration Studies called it a supercharged legal pathways program and said that most approved under it would have failed to qualify for refugee status under past rules. The Biden administration expanded the program this spring to include Honduras and El Salvador as well, saying it was necessary to prevent illegal border crossings. At the same time, they've also raised the Latin American refugee limit to 50,000. That's a 10-fold increase.
And some other political news here. On Tuesday, a federal judge overturned New Jersey's ban on AR-15 rifles, ruling that the law is unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Peter Sheridan cited the 2022 Supreme Court decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Brewing, and he used that in his ruling. Now, the ruling was not a total victory for Second Amendment advocates, as Judge Sheridan did choose to uphold New Jersey's ban on magazines with a capacity larger than 10 rounds. In his 69-page opinion, however, Sheridan criticized the Supreme Court's rulings, writing, quote, "It is hard to accept the Supreme Court's pronouncements that certain firearms policy choices are off the table when frequently radical individuals possess and use these same firearms for evil purposes." Sheridan clarified that although he disagreed with the Bruen decision, he will still choose to follow the higher court's precedent. Firearms Policy Coalition President Brandon Combs welcomed the overturn of the ban.
And we're going to turn now to the Olympics, which was rocked by a major controversy yesterday where Italian women's boxer Angela Carini threw in the towel after only 46 seconds in a matchup against Algeria's Amani Khalif. He's a fighter who was disqualified from the Women's World Boxing Championships in 2023 for having male chromosomes. Several outlets have suggested that Khalif is intersex. That's a medical condition where a person has mixed sexual characteristics. Carini was left in tears after taking 2 blows to the face, yelling, "This is unjust," as the fight ended. Following the match, she said, quote, "I've never taken a punch like that. It's impossible to continue." Khalif is competing this year alongside Taiwanese fighter Lin Yuting, who also failed that gender test. Both of them competed in the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, where both of them failed to medal.
It really seems that this year's Olympics just can't escape from any sort of controversy. But while there is controversial stuff going on, it is still the Olympics, and there's still our sports and other activities going on. So let's get an update from what's going on there, starting with the male and female triathlons, which kicked off yesterday after officials decided that Paris's River Seine was finally safe for swimming. That comes after E. coli and other dangerous bacteria surged following heavy rains, which had caused delays. And this does mark a historic moment, as there's been a swimming ban in that river for 100 years due to similar concerns about pollutants and bacteria, and it's had very few exceptions granted in that time. The river actually underwent a $1.5 billion cleanup effort to prepare for the Games. Meanwhile, in Team USA, Katie Ledecky secured her place in history as one of the greatest American women swimmers, as she dominated the women's 1,500-meter freestyle, taking first place with 10 seconds to spare, and that gives her her 8th Olympic gold and her 12th medal overall.
Very exciting. We do congratulate Katie there. Very impressive. With that, that is our program for today. So thank you so much for joining us. And please visit FISMnews.tv for more content and for any other updates until our next show. Be sure to follow us on social media, where you can download the FISM app. Thanks so much. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow with more news coverage.